At 5:30 on this morning of December 22nd, 1944, Colonel Ernst Keller lay pressed into the frozen earth of a shallow foxhole roughly 300 meters from the American defensive ring outside the Belgian town of Bastogne, silently observing his troops as they prepared for an assault that, by every calculation, should have concluded days earlier. Keller commanded the 27th Volksgrenadier Division, a formation hardened by years of combat, led by a 44-year-old officer who had survived the Eastern Front and learned the brutal mechanics of encirclement warfare the hard way. His division had completed the encirclement of the town on December the 20th, sealing off the American garrison completely. The enemy inside the perimeter had no supply routes, no reinforcements, and no viable escape. By doctrine, their fate should already have been sealed. Keller commanded approximately 8,000 men, supported by armor and artillery, and carried direct orders to seize Bastogne without delay. The town was not important for its size or defenses, but because it sat astride a vital road network essential to the German winter offensive in the Ardennes. Whoever controlled Bastogne controlled movement across the region. Inside the perimeter were roughly 18,000 American troops, primarily paratroopers from the 101st Airborne Division, lightly armed infantry with only limited heavy weapons. They had arrived hurriedly on December the 19th, transported by truck, lacking proper winter clothing and carrying insufficient ammunition. Many still wore summer uniforms, while temperatures plunged below freezing each night. The Americans possessed no organic tank units and only a modest artillery complement. Standard military theory held that light infantry, once surrounded by armored formations, rarely resisted longer than 48 hours before collapsing or surrendering. From the first hours of the siege, conditions inside the American perimeter were severe. Food supplies were scarce, and the division had not been provisioned for a prolonged defense. By December the 21st, rations had been cut in half, with some units surviving on a single meal per day. Soldiers scavenged abandoned Belgian homes and farms, slaughtering livestock when they could find it, but hunger was a constant companion. Medical supplies were in even shorter supply. The primary divisional medical clearing station had been overrun on December 19th, captured along with much of the medical staff and equipment. Wounded soldiers were treated in improvised aid stations using whatever materials could be salvaged. Surgeons operated without adequate anesthesia. Bandages were cleaned and reused, and men died from wounds that under normal circumstances would have been survivable. Ammunition was rationed with extreme discipline. Machine gunners fired only at confirmed targets, riflemen were instructed to make every round count, and artillery commanders carefully calculated daily fire allowances to preserve shells for emergencies. By December the 22nd, artillery units were limited to 10 rounds per gun per day. Barely enough to sustain a defensive posture. Among the American units defending Bastogne was the 972nd Field Artillery Battalion, an African-American unit equipped with heavy 155mm howitzers. Attached to the Airborne Division specifically to provide firepower it otherwise lacked, the battalion distinguished itself throughout the siege, delivering thousands of rounds in support of the defense despite severe shortages. The defenders knew resupply by ground was impossible. Everything depended on holding until relief arrived, or until they were destroyed. The cold was as dangerous as the enemy. Nighttime temperatures dropped well below freezing, and soldiers in foxholes suffered frostbite and trench foot. Fingers and toes were lost to cold injuries. Men huddled together for warmth, stuffed newspapers and rags into their uniforms, and wrapped their feet in burlap sacks. The cold drained energy, dulled reflexes, and magnified every hardship. Yet morale remained unexpectedly high. The paratroopers believed relief would come. They believed General Patton was advancing. That belief sustained them through conditions that would have shattered less confident units. By the third day, Keller was unsettled. He had seen surrounded formations before, particularly on the Eastern Front, where encircled units either attempted immediate breakout or collapsed within days once the reality of their situation became clear. Discipline eroded quickly. Officers lost control. Soldiers abandoned positions in search of food or warmth. The will to fight evaporated. But the Americans at Bastogne behaved differently. Keller's division had launched multiple assaults, each time expecting the enemy line to crack, and each time encountering resistance that defied expectation. Machine gun positions that should have been silenced continued firing. Foxholes that should have been abandoned remained occupied. American soldiers fought with a confidence suggesting they expected victory. Casualty reports only deepened the mystery. German battalions were suffering losses consistent with assaults against fortified positions, not against a trapped and desperate enemy. Regimental commanders reported disciplined fire control, careful ammunition management, and professionally maintained defenses. None of it matched Keller's experience of surrounded troops. The terrain offered no obvious explanation. Bastogne sat amid rolling farmland with open fields of fire. The perimeter was thin, the town small. German artillery could reach every American position and attacks could be launched from all directions, nor was American equipment exceptional. Intelligence officers examined captured weapons and supplies, finding standard rifles, machine guns, bazookas, and limited mortars. Nothing extraordinary. German numerical superiority was overwhelming, nearly 5-1, with complete dominance in armor and artillery. And yet every attack failed. The first major assault on December 20th followed textbook doctrine. Artillery preparation followed by infantry supported by assault guns. Keller observed the bombardment through binoculars as shells bracketed American positions, splintering trees and throwing geysers of earth into the air. After 15 minutes, the infantry advanced across open ground, closing to within 200 meters before American fire erupted. Machine guns fired from positions that should have been destroyed, rifles delivered controlled and accurate volleys, and mortar rounds landed precisely among the attackers. The assault stalled, casualties mounted, and a second wave fared no better. By late afternoon, Keller withdrew his forces, having achieved nothing but losses. What disturbed him most was the Americans' behavior under artillery fire. They remained in their foxholes during the bombardment and resumed firing almost immediately afterward. Keller had watched countless units break under shelling, but these men absorbed it and fought on as if unaffected. By December 21st, higher headquarters ordered him to demand surrender. Encircled forces always surrendered once reality set in. Surely these Americans would do the same. The surrender ultimatum was delivered under flag of truce on the morning of December 22nd. It was formal, detailed, and absolute, outlining the hopelessness of resistance and offering honorable terms. The reply arrived within an hour. It consisted of a single word: nuts. Keller stared at the message in disbelief until an English-speaking officer explained its meaning. The Americans were not merely refusing to surrender, they were mocking the demand. Keller had never encountered such a response. Surrounded commanders typically negotiated, explained, delayed. This was different. These men were cold, hungry, outnumbered, and nearly out of ammunition, and they were laughing. In that moment, Keller began to understand the nature of his enemy. The 101st Airborne was elite, not because of equipment or numbers, but because of belief. These soldiers genuinely believed they would win. That belief transformed how they fought. Soldiers who expect death fight desperately, but eventually break. Soldiers who expect capture surrender. But soldiers who expect victory fight with calculated aggression, holding impossible positions because they do not perceive them as impossible. As the siege continued, every German unit reported the same phenomenon. American positions were never abandoned casually. Wounded men continued fighting. Officers led from the front. Positions had to be taken by direct assault because the Americans refused to yield ground simply because they were flanked or shelled. This had a profound psychological effect on German troops. Attacking an enemy that would not quit bred hesitation, caution, and doubt. When the weather cleared on December 23rd, everything changed. For the first time in days, the fog lifted and the sky turned blue. American aircraft appeared overhead, dropping hundreds of tons of supplies with remarkable accuracy and attacking German artillery, armor, and supply columns. With no air cover of their own, German logistics began to collapse. Ammunition and fuel dwindled, while the Americans inside Bastogne were resupplied from the air. By December 24th, intelligence reports confirmed American armored forces advancing from the south. Keller understood the danger immediately. If relief broke through, his division would be trapped between the defenders and the advancing tanks. He requested permission to withdraw. It was denied. Bastogne was to be taken at all costs. The final assault came on Christmas morning. Tanks and infantry advanced in darkness, hoping for surprise. The Americans were ready. Artillery with proximity fuses shredded exposed infantry, anti-tank guns opened fire at close range, and the battlefield erupted in flame and chaos. Tanks were destroyed, crews killed or forced to abandon their vehicles, and German infantry found themselves isolated and surrounded. By dawn, the attack had collapsed entirely. On December 26th, American armor finally broke through. The siege was over. Keller withdrew his shattered division under cover of darkness. Later, he would describe Bastogne as the most difficult battle of his career, not because of American numbers or weapons, but because of their will. They fought, he said, like men who had already won and were simply waiting for the enemy to realize it. That belief, unshakable, collective, and absolute, was more powerful than any tank or artillery piece, and at Bastogne, it changed the course of the war.